Sunday morning comes around again, and after last week having Luke Smallbone from For King and Country was a little bit like having a history maker in amongst us, wasn't it, Lisa?
Oh, that's a good segue.
Yeah, thanks for joining me this morning, Lisa. How are you going?
Very good, very excited because we're going to be talking to Matt Prater, and he is on our Flow radio network. He's our feature on History Makers. He's actually the host of History Makers, and he does a superb job. He's a trailblazer when it comes to interviewing many people.
He has interviewed a lot of incredibly interesting people and how they've made history and doing things both quietly and in a very humble way in God's kingdom and for his work. And that's why we've decided to get the history maker himself on the radio on our Sunday service. Instead of having him on Sunday night, he got Sunday morning, and he's a pastor of a local church in Brisbane. He'll quite enjoy joining us in just a few moments on the Sunday service. Great to be with you on the Sunday service. Lisa and Wayne with you, and as we mentioned earlier, Matt Prater. Now, this is one of our regular radio hosts here on Flow FM. He hosts the show, which I can say has been on the program here for a number of years, History Makers. And each Sunday we reflect with Matt Prater on one of those people that's gone out and done something with their lives and why they did it. But we thought on our Sunday service we'd like to interview the history maker himself. So, Matt Prater, how are you?
Mate, if I was any fitter, I'd be dangerous.
You're very proactive, Matt. We are very excited to have a chance to interview you. It's good to be able to turn it around into the hot seat you're sitting in at the moment.
Yeah, well, I'm just so blessed to be able to be on your station. I've heard great things about Flow FM over the years, and it's good to connect with you guys.
Yeah, terrific to have you on board. Tell us about your background, though. I'm going to go back a little bit before we get to History Makers, your pastoral work that you're doing. But I want to ask you, Matt, about what is the story with you? Where do you come from? Where did you grow up? What was your influences in your earlier life?
Well, I was born in Tamworth in country New South Wales, and my parents moved to Coffs Harbour when I was 2 years old. And I eventually found them and moved in with them, and grew up on the beach at Coffs Harbour. I was at Coffs Harbour till I was about 18 years old, and I loved to surf. I loved being a part of, Sunday school at the Anglican Church in Coffs Harbour. I grew up there, so I had a Christian background. But when I was a teenager, I started getting a little bit bored with church and wanted to go surfing instead, and got a bit of an attitude, and then there was this blonde girl at school that was going to the local Wesleyan Methodist youth group. And I thought, I might go along to that youth group.
Yeah, because they had surfing at youth activity nights.
See, maybe, and then they went to a youth camp. The girl that I liked went to a youth camp. I thought I might go to that youth camp, and then at the youth camp, I heard the message of the gospel for the first time in my life, and I was 15, and I responded to the altar call, and it was like everything changed in my life that day. So I went back from the youth camp, forgot about the girl, and just followed God, and pretty much started in ministry straight away. I ended up becoming a youth leader and running a Christian outreach at my school, and that's pretty much how I got into ministry. And at the same time, I was working at a youth radio station called CHYFM, and I started doing a Christian radio show back then. It was 1991, it would have been, or 1990. And I've been in radio ever since then.
That's incredible. Now, were your parents Christian, Matt? Did they have any influence on your life?
Well, my mum and dad attended church while I was a kid, and then my dad stopped going when I was a teenager, and that's pretty much when I went astray, when he stopped going to church. But Mum, she was full on, and she would teach Sunday school, and she would speak at churches, and she's written Christian books. And then my parents split up when I was about 20, and both remarried now. And Mum actually remarried a pastor, so I've got a pastor, a stepdad for a pastor, or pastor for a stepdad, I should say. Dad's never really got full on for God since then. But I'm working on him,
Now, you mentioned when you were 15, you said that at that time, just prior to making a decision, you felt that you were bored. Was it because there wasn't any relevance with the faith that you were hearing from the church pulpit?
Yeah, well, I just think I started hanging around the wrong crowd. At school, you've got the troublemakers that, stir up a bit of trouble. I just remember I was just hanging around some bad eggs at school, and they were starting to go to parties and they were getting into trouble. And I think I was just around a bad crowd at that time. And church for me was aimed at adults. It wasn't really aimed at teenagers back then. It was a very conservative church. And so, I think that was also part of it, and I'd never actually heard the gospel. I didn't know that you could ask Jesus to come into your heart. I just thought God was off in the distance and you just had to be good. I just thought you just had to attend church and be good. But I didn't realise that you could actually ask Jesus to come into your life and forgive you of your sins. I never realised that. And
so is that what you actually did? Can you perhaps spell it out, what you actually did? What did that look like?
Yeah, well, I remember at the youth camp, the guy just got up and he shared John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. And he said, if you want to give your life to Jesus and be born again, pray this prayer. And so I put my hand up and I prayed the prayer. And I remember feeling like this burden came off me, like my heart came alive. And from that day forward, all I wanted to do was talk to people about Jesus. Like I just wanted to pray for people. I loved reading the Bible. It was like I changed overnight from someone not interested in God for someone with a zeal and a passion for God. And it was one of those radical transformations.
This is an interesting interview on our Sunday service today. Matt Prater is a Christian pastor, but he also is a radio broadcaster of over 30 years, and he is a program on Flow on Sunday nights called History Makers, and we're interviewing the history maker himself here on the Sunday service. Back with more in a moment. Here we are on Sunday service, and we love having an opportunity of having a guest. And Lisa, Matt Prater is a guy that we've just heard has found salvation at the age of 15. He's prayed a prayer. He's heard the word of John 3:16. He's now dedicated his life to God and his service. And we've got the privilege of speaking to this man who has a program called History Makers on the radio. And Matt, that decision, did you have brothers and sisters at the time or close friends? How did those that were in your own peer age group, how did they react to this change of your life?
Yeah, well, I remember after I prayed that prayer and came to Christ and I went back to school, my mates noticed that I was different. One of my good buddies, he said to me, I remember you just weren't rude to the teachers anymore. You didn't want to go and smoke cigarettes behind the bike shed. You didn't want to get into fights. All you wanted to do was talk about Jesus. And, there was actually something that happened at my school that was quite a big event soon after that. There was a kid that turned up at school with a gun. And he shot one teacher in the chest, one girl in the leg, and one teacher in the hand.
Wow.
And that's terrifying.
Oh, it was horrific. And thankfully no one died that day. But the whole school went into lockdown and, we all got sent home. It was a sports carnival day. We all got sent home. And there was just so much trauma in the school for weeks after that. And so our little Christian group, we just prayed. And every week, new kids would come and join our Christian group. And some weeks I'd have like 100 kids coming to this little Christian group. And I was like 16 years old, just trying to work out how to lead through this difficult time.
So did you start this group yourself?
Well, no, I actually joined the group and my youth leader was running it at the time, and then he handed it over to me when he finished school, and I became the leader, and the group just grew. And so out of that, a whole bunch of kids got saved. It's like what the enemy meant for bad, God turned around for good. And so I had this instant high school ministry of 40 or 50 kids, and I became the youth leader at the local church with about 60 or 70 kids, and it was just like this mini revival in this little town of Coffs Harbour. And that's pretty much how I got launched into ministry at that age.
That's fascinating. What do you think created that enthusiasm? Would you believe it? You really felt that was a God thing?
Yeah, well, I remember I had a number of mentors at that time. So my previous youth leader, and there was a bunch of young guys who were like in a Christian band in Coffs Harbour at the time, and they were all cool, surfy guys, and they were all very passionate evangelists. And I think just hanging around that crowd inspired me to rise up and be what God had called me to be. So, you know, they say if you hang around dogs, you end up with fleas and you end up flying, you know.
Matt, you mentioned there the story of what the enemy meant for evil, God turned for good. It comes from the Bible passage in Genesis where Joseph actually and his brothers are in discussion, and it's after he reveals himself to them as the king or as the emperor, if you like, or the prime minister of that land in Genesis 50:20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result so that many people would be preserved to be alive. And I suppose as a preface, do you base that early Christian conviction in any context on any Bible character or on anything that you'd learnt at the time?
Yeah, well, I also remember one of the verses that became a life verse for me back then. There was another passage in Jeremiah 29:11. It says, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And then it says, then you'll call upon me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. And that verse from Jeremiah, you know, was the prophet Jeremiah prophesying that to the prophet Daniel, you know, when Daniel was in exile in Babylon, you know, and they were in this terrible situation in their life, but God said, I've got a plan for you, I've got a purpose for you. And I think a little bit similar like the story of Joseph, you know, God can raise up a Joseph, he can raise up a Daniel, he can raise up someone in the midst of a difficult time. And so for me, I just knew that God was raising me up to be a witness to my schoolmates in that time, yeah.
Yeah. Now, let's move on a little bit because obviously you're growing to a young man, you're leading a youth group, life encounters, work and so forth. Did you immediately go into pastoral ministry or did you get involved in radio full-time? What was the next stage of your life?
Yeah, so straight after school, I went to Bible college in Sydney at Phil Pringle's church, C3 Church at Oxford Falls. Did 1 year of Bible college there and absolutely loved it, and then went back to Coffs Harbour and became the youth pastor at the C3 church. I was there for 4 years, and at the same time I started selling radio advertising at the community radio station, and then I started working for the commercial radio station in town, which was run by a Christian guy named Richard Daniel, who's with me over the years. You may have heard of him.
Yeah, I know Richard, yes.
Yeah. So he was my boss, and so I was selling radio advertising, and I was a youth pastor at the same time. And then after a couple of years of selling radio, I felt called to do full-time Bible college. So I did correspondence Bible college for 3 years. Then some drama happened at the church I was at, and I ended up going to the Baptist church in Coffs, and I was youth pastor there for 4 years and had an incredible time of ministry there. And then felt God called me to Brisbane.
Wow. We're talking with Matt Prater. He is a history maker. Well, yes, he hosts a show called History Makers, and we're going to come back. He's just taken us on the journey of his early life and how he got involved in full-time ministry. He was also involved in broadcasting, to which he still is involved today, some 30 years later. It is your Sunday service with Wayne and Lisa. I love it on Sunday morning when we're able to get together and have this Sunday service. This started, Lisa, back, nearly 3 years ago when we started entering that time of COVID-19, and we felt that country areas may not have a church service to go to because people were in lockdown circumstances and so on.
It was terrible, isolating, wasn't it? And it was good to be able to have an opportunity to be able to go to a church, and if you couldn't actually physically go, you can listen on the radio.
You can, and you could hear a program on Sunday night called History Makers, and I've listened I don't know how many shows of History Makers over the years and heard the testimonies of many. And the bloke that actually has been the foundation of this radio program, History Makers, is Matt Prater. And Matt's a pastor. He's just relocated from Coffs Harbour, surfy Coffs Harbour I might add, to Brisbane. Matt, were you married when that all happened? I mean, did you have that young blonde surfy chick in your life after that, or did something else happen?
Yeah, no, so I never ended up dating that young blonde girl.
Yes.
But I did get married when I was 20 at the C3 church when I was a youth pastor there. And I was married for 5 years to my first wife. That ended in a very difficult circumstance, which I won't go into the details, but at the age of 25, I found myself, divorced and was just brokenhearted. And I actually thought, I wouldn't be in ministry again. I thought, that's it. I'll just go and work in radio and make a lot of money and try and move on in life. But that Bible verse kept coming back to me. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not harm you, to give you a hope and a future. And so that was like my Job time, I call it, because I really, after having this incredible start of ministry, I hit rock bottom, and it had actually happened. So I'd actually moved to Brisbane with my first wife, and then when she told me that she was leaving, and it was just that horrible time, the pastor I was going to church with at the Vineyard Church in Brisbane, he took me under his wing and he said, Matt, God hasn't finished with you yet. He's got a plan for you. And he kind of mentored me and counseled me and helped me get through that difficult time. And then soon after, I got a job at 96.5, a large Christian radio station in Brisbane.
That's incredible. Matt, we need to know, you were in this terrible, dark time in your life. How did you cope? What were some of the practical ways that when people are in that kind of situation, what was the strength that got you out of that situation? Was there certain things? I know that God gave you that enablement, but can you tell us practically, what does that look like for somebody listening now that are in that position right now?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. It was a real test for me because, after, being a youth pastor and being married for 5 years, you all of a sudden find yourself single. You could easily go and make some foolish decisions that would cost you the rest of your life, that you'd have consequences for the rest of your life. So I had to really stay close to God in that time. So
emotional pendulating circumstances, it's terrifying when you go through something such a betrayal of your heart. It hurts so bad. This is the hard part. This is how do you centre yourself?
Yeah, so I really made sure that I went through the spiritual disciplines that us Christians follow, So I made sure I was in the Word of God every day. I made sure I was attending church regularly. I went to a Christian counsellor, and, some blokes think, I don't need any counsellor, I'm fine. But you know what? Everyone needs help sometimes, So I went to this Christian counsellor who was amazing and just hung around really good people that cared for me and loved me in that time. And out of that time, I believe it was the closest I've been to God in my entire life. So once again, what the enemy meant for evil, God turned around for good. I grew closer and stronger to God in that time that I had been previously.
They say that a pearl needs agitation to get the pearl from forming in the shell. And it's kind of the similar thing in the spiritual sense, isn't it? Like a strengthening. Yeah,
it certainly did strengthen me in that time. And, the book of James says, consider it pure joy when you go through trials of many kinds because it develops your character, your faith, your perseverance. And, I definitely would say that's the time that I was developed and strengthened more than ever. I ended up working at 96.5 Christian Radio and became the sales manager there. We had an incredible season of growth, and I basically just picked myself up and thought, well, that's what God was calling me to do next. And in that time, I started dating my now wife, Carol. We've now been married for 19 years. And Carol and I fell in love. And, she was like, God gave me a second chance. And so Carol and I, then got married, and we really felt called to do something for God. And we started running an Alpha course at the radio station, and all these people came to Christ. And we were sending them to New Hope Church because we knew it was a good church for unchurched people.
Yes.
And then the pastor rings and he says, why don't you come and help me with all these new Christians you're sending there? So we went and joined this church called New Hope. And soon after that, the pastor asked me to take over the church. And I was only 30 years old at the time. But that's when I took over New Hope, and that was 17 years ago now.
Wow. You talked there about this restoration, this marital restoration too with Carol, and it does remind me of that verse, Joel chapter 2, where the years that the locusts have eaten, God will restore. And in a sense, Matt, it seemed like that terrible dark time that you had, that God restored those times of peril, if you like, that you went through, like a locust attacking your life, the very fibre of your life. Well, suddenly he restores those years that the locusts have eaten. Yeah, well, it was such a blessing for me when Carol came into my life, because we had worked together and we'd known each other a little bit, and then we actually started running Alpha courses together at the Vineyard Church we were going to, and I just started to realise that she was the one that the Lord had, prepared for me. So it was such an answer to prayer, and she never thought she'd be a pastor's wife. She thought she was marrying a radio sales guy who was going to earn lots of money, but instead she married a guy who ended up being a pastor, and she is just like a dream pastor's wife, like she's the most loving, caring person, and she runs the women's ministry and the kids' ministry, and she does the books for the church. Like she's just, like she's perfectly made for the role. So yeah, she's certainly an answer to prayer.
Yeah. What a beautiful answer to prayer. And really what Wayne has said with the Joel passage is definitely true. He will repay the years the locusts have eaten. The great locust and the young locust, the other locusts and that locust swarm. My great army that I send among you, you'll have plenty to eat until you are full, and you will praise the name of the Lord your God, who has worked wonders for you. Never again will my people be shamed. And it is a very good promise out of Joel's writings in the Old Testament from the Bible on the Sunday service, where our guest is a history maker. He's the bloke that actually runs the program called History Makers, which we present here on Sunday nights on Flow FM. Matt Prater. Back with Matt in just a moment. Sunday service time, and on Sunday service we love to have an interview, and if we can get somebody that makes history, then we get them on the radio, and this bloke's made a lot of history. At least he's brought different discussions about blokes and women who have made history on History Makers. Matt Prater, who produces the program, and we're just about at that point where I want to actually say, Matt, what was the concept and who came up with it? How did you get this idea that you'd like to interview people who are history makers and get their stories and put them on the radio? Okay, well, I was working at 96.5 in Brisbane, the Christian radio station in Brizzy, and I was the sales manager, and I always had this dream to be back on air, but they didn't have any jobs for me, and anyway, so I ended up going to a Scripps Union fundraising night, and there was 4 guest speakers, and I took along a little recorder and asked them all if I could interview them. And the 4 speakers were Kevin Rudd, who was the then shadow foreign minister. Yes. John Anderson, former deputy prime minister. Marina Pryor, opera singer. And Tim Costello, former CEO of World Vision. Oh, you got some beautiful, beautiful artists there to be able to interview. So they were the first 4 people I ever interviewed, and I asked them about how they became Christians. I asked them what their influences were, what their favourite Bible verses were, and so I presented them to my boss at 96.5, and they went, yep, we'll put that on the radio. So they played it. And then I had a coffee with Phil Edwards, who's the CEO of Vision Radio, where I also work, and he said, you should offer this to other stations, and he said, we'll take it. So he then gave me a database of all the other Christian radio stations in Australia, and I started emailing everyone, and they said, yes, please, do more. So that was 17 years ago, and that was the same time I became a pastor at New Hope. So it was like God really opened up the door for me to do a national radio ministry.
and pastoring at the same time. And now we're on, 30 different community stations around Australia. We're on the Vision Network. We're also on Flow FM, We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, social media, Facebook, Instagram, and you just never know who's going to listen to one of your interviews,
That's exactly it. And when we looked at having History Makers on Flow as a commercial network, we felt that there was a need for this type of content on Sunday night, because the testimonials that were being told were of average, normal people, but they'd done something extraordinary. They'd made a confession to Christ and then had their sins forgiven, and then made a decision to have their lives in His hands and to be used for His purposes. As Matt, I know you did purposefully in not only your church that you're involved with at New Hope, but also in doing this radio program, History Makers. So I'm going to put it to you. If I set outside of those first 4 people that you interviewed on your first program, which of course Kevin Rudd, John Anderson, Marina Pryor, very, very well-known folk in the context of their lives, but have you interviewed any other luminaries, like people of significance who've got a significant faith and a story to tell?
Well, I'll tell you, one of my favourite ones I ever did was Billy Graham's grandson, Will Graham.
Yeah.
Now, I've had the privilege of meeting him a number of times since, but our first ever interview was about 10 years ago, and it was in Broken Hill in New South Wales. And I know you've got a background there, Wayne. You used to be involved there many years ago. And I ended up doing a breakfast show with him in the Gloria Jeans in Broken Hill. And then I interviewed him about his testimony and his belief and, his ministry. And, of course, Billy Graham is one of my greatest heroes ever. And to connect with Will has just been so exciting. And so we became friends, 10 years ago. And now every time he comes to Australia, I go and do the media with him. So I've now travelled with him to Alice Springs. We've also been to Kalgoorlie. And we were just in Hobart a few months ago as well. About 750 people came to Christ in Hobart and Launceston when he preached there a few months ago. And now the other big news, Wayne, which I don't know if you've heard, but I'm actually going on long service leave at Christmas, and I'm going to be staying at the Billy Graham Pastors Retreat for a week. Will's putting me up there for a week, and I get to go to his radio station and do some interviews while I'm there. So that's definitely been one of my God connections that the Lord's raised up from the show over the years.
And, of course, just recently we were watching a replay of Billy Graham's funeral service and at the library and just out of Charlotte, a magnificent location, and the beautiful singing that he had at his funeral, and the speakers, people sitting there, presidents of the United States and leaders from around the world. What a legacy he left to his son Franklin, who I think is doing an incredible ministry too with Samaritan's Purse, and now Will, grandson Will, who is also getting around the place, including Australia, one of Billy Graham's favourite locations. So a real history maker. Now, for the ladies' point of view, you've had a number of women that have been on. Where's one of the ladies? Maybe a little story of somebody that's really touched your heart from the female side of history makers.
Yeah, well, one of the good things about my ministry is that I've not only got famous people on the show, I've also got people that I've seen come to Christ through my soup kitchen as well. And one of them was a lady that I interviewed, it might have been a couple of years ago now. And so her name's Mel. She didn't want to use her surname because of her background, and it was complicated. But Mel was someone I interviewed a couple of years ago. She had formerly been a stripper. She'd been on the streets as a prostitute. She'd been on drugs, all sorts of trouble. She came to Christ through our soup kitchen and got off the drugs, got her life on track, and now she's a travelling speaker who travels around and does all sorts of evangelism. And, she works with the Salvos, and she's just got an incredible heart for God. And, for me, you can't argue with a person's testimony. So for me, sharing a testimony like that, I think is one of the best evidences of the power of God. Certainly Mel that I interviewed a couple of years ago, that'd be one of my favourite among some of the women I've chatted to.
It's a beautiful story and one where history has been made every time one person decides that they want to give up their own struggle, put their hands into the hand of the one who stilled the waters and asked Jesus to bring you into a relationship with him, to forgive you of all the things that you've done wrong. Doesn't matter how big, how small, and that, like Mel did, you can too become a follower and somebody who is then put into history-making situations. Our guest is Matt Prater. He hosts the program on Flow FM on Sunday nights, History Makers, and we're talking to him from Brisbane. He also pastors the New Hope Church.
And it certainly is wonderful to be able to listen to how people can have their lives transformed.
Yeah, really transformed by a personal relationship. We're going to have a look at another topic when we return on our Sunday service with Matt, and that is that he's decided that he's not only got the soup kitchen running, he's not only got his radio voice on, he gets up there and preaches a couple of good sermons at the New Hope, but he also has a writing skill and has released a book recently, and we're going to ask him all about that in a moment here on the Flow Sunday service. Matt Prater is a broadcaster of the program History Makers. We've been learning a lot about his life from, a surfy beginning on the shores of Coffs Harbour in the New South Wales North Coast to a Brisbane pastor and broadcaster as he interviews many folk, both well-known and those quite achievers who are all history makers. And we too can be a history maker, and you can read about being a history maker, Lisa.
Yeah, you certainly can. He's certainly cyber surfing now. He's very well known nationally by the looks, and he certainly has a lot of energy, and it's been a privilege to have you on the show, Matt.
Yeah, it is. Matt, tell us about this book that you've written.
Yeah, well, I've been having this dream in my heart to release a book of devotionals for a long time. And, I've been pastoring for 17 years, and when I became a pastor, I started reading the Bible through every year. So I read the Old Testament once, New Testament twice, and then I have 4 or 5 chapters every day, and then I write down a little journal or a devotion. So what I've done is I've handpicked some of the best ones of those and compiled them in a little book called History Makers, Devotions, Downloads, and Dad Jokes. Now, the first part of the book is there's 82 devotionals in there, and it's just a simple Bible verse, a few little thoughts from me, and then a prayer. And then on the next page, there's a whole bunch of lines where you can write down what God is saying to you from that Bible verse. Mm-hmm. And so, they say it takes 28 days to form a habit. So my goal for this book is that people will read through the devotionals for at least 28 days and form that habit, hopefully, and for the rest of their life, they'll do daily devotions. Because all the research shows if you do daily devotions every day in God's Word, you'll grow as a Christian. If you don't do it every day, you won't grow as a Christian. And so that's what most of the book is about. And then I've got a few articles in there and a few dad jokes for a bit of fun at the end.
That sounds wonderful. And if people want to get the book, what do they have to do, Matt?
Okay, so it's $15 and it's available at the website historymakersradio.com. And you can send us an email there. We'll mail it out. $15 plus postage, and all the money goes to the church and the ministry I work for, so it goes towards a good cause.
Yeah, it's fantastic news. It's good news, and it is the good news that each of us can respond to and become one of those history makers. Matt Prater, from your church and also from your radio work, it's been a delight and a joy to have a friendship that's built with those programs, and we hope to build it even stronger into the future as you continue to seek God and His purpose for your life and us too here at The Flow. You have a great weekend and enjoy as you do your pastoral work. We've recorded this program before Sunday so that Matt could actually be in the pulpit. So we look forward to having a chat with you about your long service leave and maybe a big trip to America at another time.
Well, thank you so much, guys. God bless, and I reckon you're history makers.
Good on you, and send our love to Carol.
We will, definitely.
Okay.
That was Matt Prater, and that was our Sunday service. Thank you for joining us today.